Hello and welcome everyone here. This is the next session of our Mars webinar. It's Thursday, May 27th, 2021. And as always, the last Thursday of the month here it's 9 o'clock here in Germany. And we have our webinar, our Mars webinar here about the topics market access and reimbursement in Germany. My name is Lutz Wilmer and I will be your moderator tonight. So just before we come to our topic about the Mystic Arbitration Board and our great special guest tonight, let me give you some general informations. Mars is the German-speaking market access expert for your topics, price and reimbursement strategies. So if you need any help with pricing and reimbursement and also with health economics, or the reimbursement submissions like for the GBA, the German AMNOG, or the DIGA pathways, or the Swiss BIG, or the Austrian Hauptverband, please let us know. And also we support you with the negotiation here and also with our virtual reality camps. That what we developed something really nice with VR technology to also give you a nice training for your price negotiations. As always, here in our webinars, feel free to ask questions. After the presentation, we will have plenty of time for your questions. You use either the Zoom chat function or the question A function to raise your question or comments. And as always, slides will be provided afterwards, and also the video will be published on our website. So, and that's actually a good point where you can find our last webinars, like the one with the 10 years of AMNOG process with our good friend, Professor Dr. Thomas Hammerschmidt from the University of Applied Sciences in Rosenheim, or all the others. For example, the last one with Willy Wellner, where we talked about the hospital landscape and how to get market access in the hospitals. That was also a good one. Yeah, and then we also have our you can subscribe, of course, to our YouTube channel. That's also a good time where all the videos are stored, so you will get notified automatically when the new video is uploaded there. And also we have a calendar. Before we come today to our presenters tonight, Stefan, myself, and our special guest tonight, Professor Dr. Jürgen Wasem, the former head of the arbitration board. Let me show you the next calendar slides. No, did we miss the slide with that one? Okay, so we missed that one. Okay, so let me here show us our next webinars. In June, end of June, our good friend Ariane Schenk from the Bitkom is coming here, and we talk about 1 year of digital health applications here in Germany, at the Garden of Eden, and all about the access. And then in July, we have Professor Uwe Schwagschal from the University of Freiburg, where we talk about the German elections ahead and what are the potential outcomes and implications on the healthcare market access. But now we come tonight to our good and special guest here. Professor Dr. Jürgen Wasem is here. Really welcome you tonight here. Professor Dr. Jürgen Wasem is currently the head of the chair of health economics at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and he did his PhD in Cologne, and he did his habilitation in public health at the University of Bielefeld. And you all probably know them not as a professor, but also as the head of the arbitration board of the AMNOG process here in the German AMNOG system, where the price negotiation between the German payer side and the manufacturers are taking place. Welcome you tonight, Professor Wasem.
Yeah, hello, if I shall say something. Otherwise, I give directly the mic to Stefan.
Yeah, and on the other side, we have my boss and our good friend, Stefan Walzer here, who will discuss with Jürgen Wasem about the Mystic Arbitration Board. So, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lutz, for the introduction as always. And obviously as well from my side, big welcome to all the participants, and also obviously a special welcome to Jürgen Walzer from the University of Duisburg-Essen. Okay, a very special topic tonight. I think we have discussed quite a while ago, actually 2 months ago, the AMNOG process, obviously also various other webinars, also we have touched base on AMNOG, but this time we thought we'd just pick out one very specific component of it, which is basically at the potential end of the whole kind of process, which is then when the two different parties do not agree to, for example, a given price. That's what people have basically all in mind, but we'll see that it does not need to be only the price. It could also be different other kind of aspects. But before we start and go again, obviously into the details of the arbitration board, very briefly again, for all of those who are not, let's say, the experts in the AMNOG process, where does the whole kind of arbitration board, let's say, sit in that process? I think obviously AMNOG process is quite clear. You need to have a dossier at the time of launch in Germany, then you have a 12-month free pricing. And within those 12 months, you have basically the benefit assessment, the decision on the benefit, on the additional benefit, obviously by the GBA, and then you have another 6 months within those 12 months where the price negotiation happen. And the price negotiation is then basically the kind of core question if potentially also the case might go to the arbitration board, as already said, if some of the parts in the contract, because ultimately the two parties need to negotiate and agree on a contract finally, are basically not agreeable, and hence that basically then goes to the arbitration board after those 12 months. That's also actually where then the free pricing stops, and I think that's also where I think some of the cases have also been decided on by the arbitration board, for example. So the price negotiation, what is that? I mean, we have currently obviously kind of situation pre and post COVID-19, right? Before COVID, it was quite clear. It was a face-to-face situation in a room like you just see on the picture. This has happened basically in Berlin, where also the two different, let's say, parties had two different rooms, one negotiation, one for the preparation. And I think nowadays, since the COVID-19 pandemic, these negotiations happen basically in web conferences. The structure of the negotiation process, maybe also just as a kind of reminder, is basically consisting of different, let's call it negotiation days, as you call it in German, Verhandlungstage, which all of those basically happen for 4 hours each, where also 5 different participants can basically be in the room and discuss, negotiate. Those can basically as well be substituted even within the kind of process within the same kind of day. And there basically the different kind of components like the price, like the length of the contract, like a couple of other further kind of aspects we'll see in the next couple of minutes are being discussed. And finally, hopefully then also being agreed before. And that's basically now the question, if there are no agreements, then the case could go to the arbitration board. So that's a cool question, right? What happens then? And I think that's also why we thought, let's call it maybe with the mystic arbitration board, right? I mean, if it's really mystic, I think that's probably the kind of cool question. But I think at the end of the day, it's at least the kind of cool question, what happens after that? As a lot of, I think also participants who have followed the other webinars know now basically what is happening probably during the AMNOG process, but it's still the question, what might then happen to the various cases after that. So let's just start basically a bit easier, right? So what is the arbitration board? And we have just heard, Lutz has already introduced Jürgen Walzer. He has been the head of arbitration of the arbitration board until 2019. Since 2019, it's Professor Huster who has taken over. And I think it's important here as well, basically, the whole kind of arbitration board consists also of one impartial chairman, 2 further impartial members, and then 2 representatives of each party. I think maybe also important, that's maybe also a question for later on, Jürgen Walzer, how important maybe the patient representation also is, because they can as well participate, right, in the arbitration board. So that's also maybe an interesting case, and especially in orphan drug areas, but probably also in others, and also the Ministry of Health could participate in the meetings. So the arbitration of the process, and before I start with that, I think I also just want to very quickly as well say a big thank you to Olga Boldarieva, who has worked with us on the arbitration process and has also done her thesis basically on that process and all of the different kind of analysis. So big thank you as well, as we have as well borrowed a couple of those analyses in the slide set. So the start of the arbitration board is basically, let's say, shortly before the 12-month end, right? That is basically where you see and where the different parties could get us one to the kind of direction that maybe an agreement cannot be reached overall for the overall kind of contract. And that's basically then also where in written the arbitration, let's say, case needs to be sent to the arbitration board. With the receipt of the application, the whole kind of procedure basically starts. Then there's basically the kind of request which it needs also to go in. There are basically the different kind of facts, the negotiation results also. That's an important component maybe. Also keep in mind that during the price negotiation, the so-called minutes are as well being taken, and those are as well, let's say, the kind of core negotiation results. And finally, I think it's also important that the non-consensual contract components, meaning the ones where no agreement could be reached, as well basically sent over to the arbitration board. In terms of communication, the chairman of the arbitration board is then informing, obviously, the other side, especially if only one party is, let's say, calling the arbitration board, and the different parties, or both parties, may submit requests for more specific information. That's all happening, let's say, within 14 days. Sounds maybe a lot, but I think if you know how as well hectic that kind of last days of a negotiation could be and are mostly, let's say, happening, I think that's also then where this kind of case would go and need to start as well in parallel. So also this thinking process needs to start, obviously, as well before the end of the price negotiation. So afterwards, the process of the arbitration obviously continues, and the invitations are being sent. Not to forget, obviously, that, as already said earlier, that also the Ministry of Health could basically take part, and they also need to be invited 2 weeks before the meeting. The consultation documents are then sent electronically. Important is then, I think that's also maybe where potentially, let's call it, the mystic part could also get in, because obviously those oral negotiations are not public. Currently, they're also happening as web conferences. They're confidential and also possible without the parties. I think that's where we could also potentially also get further insights from Jürgen Wasem after the presentation. Then there might be consultations, again, not public, confidential, and again, the Ministry of Health could participate, and within 3 months, I think that's the important component, right? So 12 months free pricing. After that, let's say 12 months, that's basically then also where the whole kind of period starts, and that's within 3 months, the arbitration board, or let's say the two parties, need to find potentially then an agreement in conjunction then with the arbitration board. And I think also important, maybe as well, Jürgen, you could as well take part on that. I think the simple majority is only needed in the decisions. So it's not all about the price. That's, I think, also what I wanted to say already in the introduction. I think just keep in mind that's also what people normally have in mind, right? If you cannot agree on a price, then you could basically call up the arbitration board. A lot of times it's obviously not only the price. A lot of times, and I think I might repeat that again towards the end of my presentation, because we see as well, we try to call it a bit the winners and the losers, right? But a lot of times it's a whole kind of contract. So, you know, we were just simplifying that, because you see here, there are different kind of topics which could be discussed within such an arbitration board process. So it's the reimbursement amount, it's the start of the validity of the new reimbursement amount, the prescription quantities, because that's also core component of the negotiations, on also the link to that, the regulation in case of exceeding, the contract term, the notice periods and the requirements, the replacement of the manufacturer discounts. I think something quite special to the, let's say, in the German context, and also the subsequent refund of the deductions and the notification to the IFA, where the price needs to be notified for, and also the practice exemption. So those are, I think, all different kind of topics. And I think what I have as well seen so far and what we have experienced so far, it's obviously not only one topic. A lot of times you basically have various topics around if you don't agree on the case as well. So what we have now as well taken, and again, big thank you, Olga. I think we have, let's say, taken a couple of examples now that we have a bit more, let's say, handy kind of things to discuss, right? You see here, those are just examples of different decisions on prescription quantities and the regulations in case of exceeding. Keep in mind, this was then taken, especially if this was, I think, the main kind of component of the case. A lot of times, as already said earlier, there might have been different topics to be discussed. So you see as well, there were in every year, basically different kind of, or number of decisions were basically taken. Also recently, I mean, we have just, let's say, one in 2021 in March, I think, which was on the Betty Beglone to temp cell. I think a lot of you have probably seen that as well in the news, but a lot of other things have as well happened during that. I think it's also maybe important as well to mention that let's say the arbitration board has probably not had so many cases in comparison to the overall number of cases being negotiated within the AMNOG process. I think that's maybe as well, at least my kind of perception. I think especially at the very beginning of the AMNOG process, I think a lot of people thought that this could be even more cases which could go to the arbitration board. So here you have another example on the practice exemption. I think important here maybe that the I think the arbitration board, I think Jürgen, you have been, I think, one of the core persons as well when that those cases have especially been negotiated. I think that the agreement of the practice, let's say exemption of specialty, is a kind of shall regulation, right? So only if there are only really important reasons to not go with the practice exemption, I think only then the arbitration board was also going, let's say, against. And I think one of the cases was dulaglutide in diabetes mellitus type 2, because I think only in one of the subgroups you have seen an added benefit. That is why I think the idea was quite clearly that the majority of subgroups have not seen an added benefit, and hence the practice exemption, let's call it, was at least a bit difficult to justify. I think that's maybe as well keeping in mind. And I think that's also important maybe when we see how maybe the arbitration board is deciding on different cases. So most important as a question, or maybe as a kind of core argument, is probably the reimbursement amount at the end of the day. I think within those reimbursement amounts, you need as well to differentiate, obviously, between drugs without an added benefit, drugs with an added benefit, and obviously as well drugs with and without an added benefit, especially if we have, let's say, different kind of subgroups or also different kind of indications in the case there. I think there are a couple of, let's say, key takeaways. I think if you see the abbreviations at the bottom of the slides, I think JTK is the annual therapy cost, Jahrestherapiekosten in Germany. And I think it's also quite clear in the very first bullet, if you don't have an added benefit, the price, or let's say the annual therapy cost of the new product, can only be as a maximum the comparable, let's say the annual therapy cost of the appropriate comparator, the ZVT, the zweckmäßige Vergleichstherapie, meaning that ideally, obviously, those prices and hence the cost would need to be lower. Important also, if there are more than one, let's say, appropriate comparator, the most economical one, all basically given already by law, right, needs to be taken into account. And I mean, again, I think the kind of important thing is probably in the second part, if no individual case exists. So also here, I think the arbitration board is taking the freedom to really have an individual look on the different cases. And I think we see that also within different decisions taken so far. Maybe another important and core takeaway is, I think, the fourth bullet. If the annual therapy cost of the appropriate comparator is showing a range within the GBA decision, normally the upper limit, or in justified cases, the mean values are being taken into account. So if you have minimum and a maximum somewhere a mean, normally it's obviously shifted towards, let's say, the higher cost with that respect. So you see as well on the right-hand side, when you just very briefly have a look on the table here. And again, if you see the red ones, it basically shows more a bit that, let's say, the case was won in a way by the payer side in Germany. But again, you see as well, if you just pick out here one of the examples, for example, just one of the red ones as well. If you take the one from June 2016, which is the fourth from the top in major depression. Also, the let's say the payer side needed to go up a bit. The wish of the payer side was basically a 7 cent, and they need to go up by 23%. But the industry, so the company, would need to go down even by around 90%. So the overall kind of arbitration decision was by a minus 81%. So that is where we have just thought, let's say if we allow 10% of upwards or downwards as a kind of a kind of acceptable range, everything above or below was seen basically either in one or the other direction. But you see, it's not just really a kind of black and white answer. It has basically various components on both sides. So what happens if there are drugs with an added benefit? And you see obviously as well here already that, let's say, the whole kind of, let's say, situation looks already quite a bit different. Just, let's say, visually, obviously, again, keep in mind, those are just examples, right? We have not included a full list. So just to get a kind of flavor and a bit of a feeling, you see as well within those, let's say, columns and lines, again, the kind of various decisions as well. But what is maybe important, I think, drugs with an added benefit, I think the consideration of only the added benefit, the Zusatznutzen, and the European prices have been taken into account for orphan drugs. I think that's maybe an important consideration as well. Maybe you could as well quickly speak on that as well. What if maybe there are not enough European prices as well available for orphan drugs, and such a case could go and would go to the arbitration, because obviously it's very difficult, let's say, to quantify sometimes the added benefit, especially if it's maybe a non-quantifiable added benefit. So that's maybe as well something keep in mind. And again, linked, I think, to that kind of comment maybe is already the next bullet. I mean, no consideration of those European reference prices were taken, especially if it was not launched in many countries. So if there were only launches in very few countries, I think the arbitration board was as well more into the kind of, let's say, consideration, not taking the European prices into account. Drugs with and without an added benefit, another group, let's say, I mean, we've just said it's 3 different kind of groups. And I think that's also quite clear. And a lot of you have probably as well seen that already, that there is then the so-called mixed prices, the Mischpreise, which have then been as well agreed. I think that's as well very important to take the patient groups and specifics of those patient groups as well into account, obviously, and especially if there are maybe subgroups as well with an added benefit and without an added benefit, but also obviously the number of patients with the epidemiological kind of numbers and the distribution around that is then as well taken into account. I think there may be as well here, maybe an interesting one is as well where and which kind of, let's say, evidence is then taken into account. I would assume that this is well taken again from the decision by the GBA, but maybe sometimes it's also some other components, because obviously in the kind of course of the use of the product, maybe there are some further evidences available. So can conclusions being drawn really? I think, again, this is probably more as a kind of discussion. Again, keep in mind, this is not really the kind of black and white answer, right? If you see here, it's more the kind of winners and losers in a very simplified way. It was just more to, let's say, grasp a bit, the kind of get a kind of feeling how it could maybe go more. And I think we have as well taken here as well the different kind of topics as well out there. And you see, for example, with the reimbursement amount, you have basically 21 of the case not defined. So it's very difficult to say yes, one or the other one was basically winning the case, again in quotes. And we have basically had 5 cases where the company have basically had, let's say, the better kind of outcome, 9 neutral, and in 13 the payer side had the better, let's say, outcomes. And you see that as well for the other kind of topics we have as well chosen here as a kind of discussion point. I think maybe as well important, I think if you could maybe take as well here a bit the kind of context, especially if you have had obviously different kind of component, different topics as well in the discussion, how that was as well seen maybe from your side. So learnings, from the arbitration decisions, I think decides, so the arbitration board is always deciding under, let's say, free appraisal of all circumstances of the individual case. I think that is something what you can really read out of all of the arbitration decisions. So it's not just a kind of simple equation or simple kind of algorithm. I think that's I think also what a lot of different, let's say, researchers have already taken and tried in the last couple of weeks and months and years, but I think there is none really. I think the arbitration board as well takes into account the specifics of each therapeutic area. That's also important, keeping in mind. But obviously, and I think that's the consistency, I think the decisions which are taken and being done are obviously then as well indirectly influencing all of the future decisions, which makes sense, right? Because of the consistency, and the arbitration board is obviously bound to the framework agreement between the different parties. So that's as well giving already a bit the kind of, let's call it maybe certainty. So at the end of the day, there is no hint of an algorithm. Prescription quantities, regulation in case of exceeding, I think there's no clear hint, not in the reimbursed price, and also not in terms of the start of the validity of the new reimbursement amount, which I think makes anyway sense. I think those cases were very, very special. And I think also in those kind of environments. So I think having said that, I think I would like to hand over to you, Jürgen Wasem, and just to listen as well to your experience, and I think to your kind of, let's say, years within the arbitration board, because obviously what we can only do is to have a look from outside, and you had the insights look. So I'm obviously looking forward to listen to your words as well.
Well, thank you, Stefan. I already only prepared one slide, but I've made some notes during your talk, and I will go through the list of notes which I've made during your talk. Talking shortly about, and then of course awaiting the questions which may arise. The first thing I wanted to point out, can you please go back and leave my slide where it is? Hello. Can you please move back to my slides? Thank you. First thing, one of the things which is an important issue within the arbitration board for the chairperson comes back to the issue which Stefan meant, that there is a majority voting, formally at least. The board has 7 members, 3 neutral members, independent members, and 2 from the manufacturer side and 2 from the payer side, and therefore, and you must take a vote. You cannot stay aside, and therefore, with a 4-by-3 decision, you would have a majority vote. And one of the crucial issues for the chairperson is, on the one side, you have to find one of the 2 parties to agree with you, because otherwise you don't get a majority at all. If both sides are against your proposal, then you don't get a majority at all. But the other thing is, do you actually want to have a 4-by-3 decision, or do you try to get an anonymous vote of the 3 independent members? That's really a crucial issue. It was a crucial issue for me, and I know from talking to the existing members in the board. I mean, 2 of them are the same than when I was the chairperson, and Stefan Huster, the present chairperson, I know him very, very well since many, many years. And that's also an issue for him. You sometimes look, when you make your decision, more to your 2 colleagues. What price do you have to pay if you get a three people having the same, giving the same vote, so that you at least end up with 5-by-2 and don't end up with 4-by-3. Actually, sometimes you also manage to get a 7-by-0 vote. If this is happening, you sometimes don't end up with a vote at all, because there's always a possibility. And I tried several times successfully, and Stefan Huster also tried several times, I think up to now not successfully, to interrupt the arbitration board and encourage the 2 parties to continue talking again. That's something which sometimes then leads to really a decision. Well, we had successful talks, and let's stop for today, and we try for 2 or 3 weeks again within the range which we have discussed up to now, whether we can reach an unanimous decision. So that was one thing I wanted to add to Stefan's talk. The second thing is Stefan quite correctly pointed out that the law is giving a really broad freedom to the arbitration board, much discretion how they can decide. And that actually was broadened and confirmed by the Federal Court of Social and Health Policy 3 years ago. I brought a case to this Federal Court where the payers actually took a suit against my decision, or the board's decision, to the regional court, and then I brought it to the federal court. And the federal court confirmed that the arbitration board really has lot discretion, and that there is no algorithm. And if they don't make a decision below the request of the payers and above the request of the manufacturers, and actually they can do what they want, basically. However, one thing which is an important issue, the arbitration board always feels a necessity to have some kind of internal consistency, what it means is that you in a certain way feel yourself bound to your earlier decisions, and in a certain way you are bound to your earlier decisions, because to a responsible public authority belongs some kind of reliability. People shall not be surprised by you're doing exactly opposite than you had done yesterday in a very, very comparable situation. Therefore, there is a necessity to some internal consistency. And this is really a big challenge because, on the other hand, you always feel special needs in special situations where you think, oh, you should be selectively responsible to react in a certain way, but you had done decisions before which in a certain way are giving a path along which you should walk. So that's the second issue which I think is worth mentioning. A third point which I wanted to talk briefly is sometimes one of the really serious considerations by the arbitration board is there a risk that the drug is leaving the German market and you want to avoid it. That's especially the case if you feel that probably your voting this time, or your majority this time, will be together with the payers against the manufacturer. Then there's always the issue, would you risk that the manufacturer is leaving the market? Unfortunately, simply asking the manufacturer is not a solution, because I think I had about 35 decisions in my tenure in this position. And I think in these 35 decisions, at least 10 times the manufacturer said, if you are doing this price which you are not proposing, then we are going from the German market. And only one time they did. Therefore, in 90%, it's just poker. And therefore, this is something where you cannot rely on the oral statement by the manufacturers, but you must get a feeling for it, whether it's really something which is really a risk, and if it is a risk, does this influence your decision? Last thing which I prepared to talk about briefly, and then I come to the questions which I wrote down during Stefan's talk. Last thing is, since I have left the arbitration board, there are new challenges because the market is changing, of course, and especially ATMPs and especially gene therapies are definitely a new challenge for the arbitration board. And the new element, of course, is that there is a one-time investment. And the expectation is that although you do only a one-time investment, you have a long-term of efficacy of the drug. And then the issue is, how do you how do you deal with this type of drug? We had, as you probably know, last month, the first decision, or end of March, it was already on Untitled, one of the gene therapies. And if you want to, we can go a little bit deeper in it later, because I think this is probably something, not all therapies will be gene therapies, of course, but we will increasingly have to deal with these things. Well, there were some points which I had prepared. Let me briefly go through the list of things which I wrote down hearing the talk or seeing the chat questions. First thing, Stefan mentions the patient representatives. Are they important? First of all, they are always there. That's true. And the German system, usually there is one patient representative who is more generalist and one who is more specifically there for the specific disease. Therefore, there is a diabetes person, which is always there for diabetes. There's an oncology person who is always there if it's oncology. And the second person is more a general one. And sometimes these patient representatives really have some impact on the arbitration board. Me personally, I always try to encourage them to say something. This may influence the arbitration board, especially with regard to to get a feeling how important is this drug for these patients. It's not always the case, to be very clear about it, that patients always say, well, we definitely need this drug, that's the breakthrough. Sometimes they are really very critical and say, well, we hear from our patients in our lobbying organization for patients that many of them are not really satisfied with the drug. It's difficult to deal with. They suffer from the safety side, etc. So it may have an impact on in both sides. It can go in both directions, but sometimes they are really important with their for giving the arbitration board a feeling how really patients think and feel about the drug. Stefan also mentions the representative of the Ministry of Health. In my 4 years in the board, I think he said twice something, therefore he's usually only silent there. He's not a member of the board, of course. He is allowed by law to take part in the decisions, and the person usually is relatively quiet. One thing I wanted to add to the schedule, which Stefan showed, I think he didn't make it explicit. Therefore, I want to make it explicit. Stefan quite correctly pointed out that free pricing ends after month 12, and arbitration board usually starts in month 12 or even in month 13. Therefore, the arbitration board's decision is usually in month 15, sometimes in month 16. Under Corona, it was even under COVID, it was even sometimes in month 17 only. Also, sometimes the arbitration board meets and then they decide that they want to do some additional analysis, looking into some payers' data or something like that, or writing a letter to GBA to ask something. Therefore, they may say, well, we now interrupt for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Therefore, usually, definitely it ends, the arbitration board ends not before month 14. It may go up to month 16, 17. And I only wanted to state, probably many of you know, then the price which the arbitration board sets will be backdated to month 13, which means that for the in month 13, 14, 15, etc., the manufacturer still will charge the free price. But then the difference between the free price and the price which is set by the arbitration board will be paid back. And usually it's that the arbitration board price is lower than the free price, and which means then that the manufacturer has to pay back money to the individual sickness funds who actually had insured who got the drugs. Therefore, this is a sickness fund by sickness fund procedure where the manufacturer has to pay back this price difference. The next thing I briefly wanted to mention, Stefan was pointing out that there were few cases that often many things are discussed, that's true, but there are only very few cases, but there were some cases where the price was agreed upon and nevertheless they went to the arbitration board. There were only 2 decisions up to now, but there were some more cases where actually the arbitration board started when the price was not controversial. But in the other cases, the chairperson of the arbitration board, partly me, but also now Stefan Huser, managed to settle the thing before the arbitration board actually met. So there are some cases, for instance, there was almost a decision whether all drugs must be listed in the price list. One company didn't want at all to have its price in the price list, and they almost were in the arbitration board. It was 2 days before the meeting of the arbitration board where they finally agreed that they also will put their price into the price list. The other thing which was decided by the arbitration board, because it was not clearly regulated in the law, was you probably know that if an orphan drug has more than 50 million sales per year, then they get a new benefit evaluation, afterwards new pricing negotiation. And it was not really clearly regulated in the law when this new price then comes into effect. And that was one of the cases where the arbitration board had to do a decision where the price was clear. The only question which was not clear was when does this new price come into effect. Another thing which I wanted to mention, since 2018, there is a smaller number of cases going to the arbitration board, which is a result of the fact that in 2018, like I already mentioned, the federal court reinforced that the arbitration board really has large freedom to decide. And it rejected, it confirmed the decisions of the arbitration board and rejected the idea of a close control by the courts. Yeah, that was not so clear up to 2018. How closely can the courts really monitor the arbitration board decisions? The Regional Arbitration Board of Berlin, which always is the first court instance which has to deal with it, had the concept of a very close control of the arbitration board. The judges in the regional court thought that they really can very closely control what the arbitration board did. And that was the reason why I went to the federal court, because I think that the idea is crazy that some judges challenge the arbitration board decision closely. And the federal court actually supported my idea and said, well, the arbitration board has a lot of freedom. And since then, in many decisions, even if one of the sides is very unhappy, they know they almost have no chance to win in the courts. I mean, after this 2018 decisions by the federal court, it's very clear that you have limited chances only to win in the courts. So that's up to, and then I want to finally comment on the 2 questions which I found in the chat before I started talking. The one question was a little bit more on European pricing. And the reference prices Stefan was mentioning. There is a list of 17 European countries for which prices should be presented. And the prices are translated in German euro purchasing power parities, which means that all prices are dealt with not that even the euro prices in many countries we have the euro, but even the euro prices are not taken in euro, but they are translated into German euros using the purchasing power parity, and then they are weighted with the sales. Therefore, the default assumption is we weight the prices with the sales in the countries. Therefore, we finally end up with a blended European price translated into wire purchasing power parities and weighting with sales in the various countries. The importance of the European price level, and Stefan made this point quite correctly, depends, of course, on the one hand, how many prices are really available, and second thing is how reliable are the informations on prices which we have. As you know, some manufacturers do have a policy that their affiliates in the various countries do not know the prices in the other countries, which is a policy which seems to be legal, and the German payers don't like it because the German law explicitly says that the manufacturers are obliged to report the real prices, and real prices means actually including secret discounts. But of course, secret discounts are secret discounts, and therefore many companies have a policy where the German daughter doesn't know the secret discounts in, for instance, England regarding the NHS and other countries. And the more you have the feeling as arbitration board that you really cannot trust the data because you don't know the real discounts, the less important are European prices. The last question which I got on the list from the chat before I started talking was the what influence does the size of the added benefit have? And you probably know that there are these two dimensions. On the one hand, you have from a major to a considerable to a minor to a non-quantifiable to none-added benefit. That definitely has some relevance, especially if you have various decisions within an indication and closed drugs, and one of them has only a minor benefit and the other has a considerable benefit. Then this really plays an important role. For instance, I remember we had diabetes drugs, several diabetes drugs, and they really had various levels of added benefit. And there, this effort, which I started to talk about on internal consistency. Well, last week we had minor added benefit, and we said its annual costs of let's say €1,000. Now we have a better grading by GBA, therefore we must be better, give more than 1,000 because of this better grading. Therefore, there is some internal consistency with regard to the added benefit. The second dimension with regard to grading of added benefit is the likelihood of the evidence base. There, you probably know it's a proof or an hint or an indication. This only has very, very minor impact. Well, last question which came here in during my talk by Pedro was, what role does cost benefit have on the arbitration process? Well, formally, this instrument does not play any role at all, but therefore, there's nothing like a formal evidence, cost effectiveness or cost benefit analysis. Implicitly, sometimes, of course, you do some calculations which are similar with like this. Take, for instance, as a good example, the last decision on Synticlo as a gene therapy, where you have this one-time investment, but you have annual costs of the comparator. There it came close to something like cost-benefit analysis insofar as the arbitration board decided, we look at the costs of 15 years and therefore, and then we also look at the benefit for 15 years. Therefore, this had some elements of a cost-benefit analysis, but there's nothing like a real explicit cost-benefit analysis. We do have a discussion in Germany at the moment whether we should do include sometimes the instrument of a cost-benefit analysis. It's a potential instrument in the law already. The law says if any of the sides is not happy with the decision by the arbitration board, they can go to ICWIC and ask for a cost-benefit analysis, a cost-effectiveness analysis, but nobody had done up to now. Jochen is asking a question in case where the ACT basket contains more than one substance and an added benefit has been shown against one of those substances, and the remaining elements automatically considered as comparable therapies. If you focus the word automatically, then the clear answer is no, but it can happen.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think, thank you, Jürgen, for, I think, all of your kind of talks and insights, let's say, really into the arbitration board. I mean, you're just very briefly as well, let's say, taking into account the added benefit and the various levels, etc. Could you also elaborate a bit how this is then being really done, for example, when you have an orphan drug with a non-quantifiable added benefit? Because that's obviously very difficult, right? I mean, there are, let's say, theoretical tools to quantify anything, but I mean, within such a process, I think it might also be quite tricky, especially in maybe such circumstances.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, the something which is where the added benefit is not quantifiable according to GBA, it's in a certain way, ironically, that then you must put an exact euro number, which is exactly the opposite of non-quantifiable. Yeah. Therefore, the good point. Well, with orphan drugs, it's it really, there is no common rule. I mean, on the one hand, sometimes the orphan drug really is the first in an indication, and then you really have problems to build up your mind. What is a potential reference point? I mean, then you may look at one thing you definitely will look at is other diseases with the same number of patients, and then you, if there is any treatment available in an indication, you may look at it, and you may look at comparable other indications where treatment may be comparable. But the more long-standing the case is, the more you are lost. I mean, in a certain way, you really are lost. And it is exactly like you said, in this cases, when you are really less, European prices become more relevant than otherwise, because if you don't have any comparable drug, if you don't have any comparable disease, if the benefit is non-quantifiable, I mean, what's left? Therefore, I think, although me personally, I'm not happy with European prices, because European prices import value judgments from other countries to Germany. Yeah. And me personally, I'm skeptical whether it's a valid way, because we want to talk about our willingness to pay, and we don't want to import British or French willingness to pay. But if you don't have anything else, then you look at least more closely to, and more longer to European prices than you otherwise would do.
Wonderful.
There is a question by somebody anonymous: if drugs are used in combination with other expensive branded drugs, how would this impact the arbitration process? That's a very important and good question. The arbitration board conceptually always makes a price for, first, in the first step, makes a price for the intervention. And the intervention then is a combination therapy. And then basically you deduct the price of your combination partner, and what's remaining is a price for the drug about which you have to decide. I mean, of course, that's also not a 100% algorithm. Therefore, don't think that is really with a calculator always one by one, but the concept really is quite clear. If you think, well, this drug is 100,000, this intervention is 100,000 euro worth annual costs, and the combination partner also already costs 60,000, then in the tendency, only 40,000 is left for the drug which you have to decide on. Yeah, therefore, and which also makes a problem. It's a special problem which you can see if the combination partner is also the comparator. I mean, you see the problem quite clearly. I mean, your intervention costs 100,000, and the combination partner is also the 60,000 is also on the other hand. I mean, then it's really becoming a problem, especially then, of course, if you don't have any added benefit. I mean, if you don't have any benefit against your combination partner, which is also your comparator, then your algorithm would be zero. Of course, you cannot decide on zero, but then you really come into problems.
Yeah, there's a question for this question coming, a follow-up question. What happens if both drugs are already approved as monotherapies and now are moved into a really high expensive combination therapy? That's also a special case.
Yeah, I mean, Well, it fits into what I said. You will decide on the added value of this intervention. I mean, if it doesn't have no added value, so if the benefit evaluation by GBA is no added benefit, then you are really. I always hoped that this wouldn't happen, because then the arbitration board really is in a difficult situation. But otherwise, it's like I just said. You will make up your mind on the fair price for the intervention, and then you see what's left. I mean, one of these two in your situation, one of the two drugs is the one which applied for the EMA label. I mean, and for this one, you set the price. Yeah, that's something which we should mention. The price of the other drug, which is a combination partner, is not affected at all. Yeah, you make your decision on the drug which gets a label extension. And this is finally in your arbitration board, and therefore you don't have any impact on the price of the other drug. Maybe then later on the payers will terminate the contract with the combination partner. Maybe that's a consequence. But at the moment in the arbitration board, you only deal with the one who got the label extension at that point in time.
Okay. So we got some really tricky decisions here, right? Where there's a lot of things to consider. It's really hard to keep all the things, and also the fair price concept. It's not that easy decision at all. What people probably have in mind there when dealing with the arbitration board.
Yes. There's a short remark by Caroline. Do existing individual rebate contracts due to 130A influence the decision of the arbitration board? Clear answer, no. Yeah, we only talk about list prices and don't look at individual rebate contracts. And there's something by Shaheen. It's a long statement. Let us take a look. I'm not sure whether I got your point. I mean, the industry members always are only there for their own drug. Therefore, I don't understand your point. Maybe you can explain why we continue. I mean, Stefan said it is always the two members of the industry are always there for their product. Therefore, I'm not sure whether I understand your question. Try another statement, Shaheen. Maybe it's more clear. Or do you, Lutz and Stefan, understand the question exactly and can help me?
Not exactly. Exactly. I had the same kind of issue, I think, as you have just raised. I think I was not exactly sure if that was maybe even a mix by the members of the arbitration board. I mean, and who's taken part there. I mean, obviously the persons who are representing the industry, they're obviously taking their roles, right? Which is always different to, let's say, the arbitration board, who's then, let's say, trying to find a solution between the two parts. That's maybe the kind of tricky part, Shaheen, which has not been quite clear. Yeah, but I think overall, I think thank you again, Jürgen Walzer. That was great insights into the arbitration board. I think it is not that mystic, but I think it's at least, let's say, individualized. I think every case is special and every case is very, let's say, different to the other ones, even though that the arbitration board is obviously consistent across, or trying to be consistent, obviously, across the various kind of decisions. So I think ultimately, I think the only thing what I can really now say at the end, prepare carefully, not only for the price negotiation, but also the price negotiation, including the arbitration board, because that might obviously end up as well after and during the kind of negotiation talks with the head association of the statutory health insurance funds. So back to you, Lutz. I think, again, big thank you to all of the questions. Big thank you to also Jürgen Walzer. Great insights and another great webinar. Lutz, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Walzer, here for that wonderful insights, for that demysticization of the arbitration board. I think that was really great. Listen to you and all your experience you have here in all that years in the AMNOG process. And I said on your CV that you have many more experience with other arbitrations board. And I think we will have also you in a new role or in the digital application boards coming up now. So congratulations to that. We're happy. And actually, that brings us to our next guest here on the next webinar. You probably know her. Ariane Schenk, a wonderful person, is coming here to us next month. And we talk about her, that 1 year digital health applications here in Germany, that the Garden of Eden. And of course, we are curious how many products end up at you, Professor Walzer, at the arbitration board, right? That would also be interesting. And then I know there were already lots of discussion how the rules are set up. So that's also interesting points here. And then in July, we have a talk with Professor Dr. Uwe Wagschar, your colleague from the University of Freiburg. He's a politician, political science professor, and we talk about the German elections ahead. I mean, we had the 10 years AMNOG with the colleague Thomas Hammerschmidt from Professor Rosenheim, and we're already discussing about here probably, what changes are coming up after the elections, and there we continues a little bit that talk. And then in August, end of August, it's getting hot here. We are having Bibiane Schulte-Bosse, our lawyer here from Strata Law Firm, and she's a wonderful person. She's a tough person, and we talk about 2 strategy rules. Whereas you know that Professor Walzer, you probably had them at the arbitration board. She's really tough, had a lot of price negotiations leaded, and we are talking about Live and Let Die, Roger Moore or Bruce Willis or Die Hard, right here in the price negotiations about strategic rules and stuff. So all of you, thank you audience, thank you Stefan, and also a special guest Jürgen Wassum. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have you all a good time. Stay safe. Bye-bye.